All right, folks, welcome back to Remote Learning with Mr. Scull. So when we finished last time, we started talking about lipids, and we were going through the functions of lipids. We talked about the first three: long-term energy storage, protection against both heat loss and physical shock. So we're on part four here. Protection against water loss. Now, there are special lipids, particularly in plants, that form an outer coating of leaves. It's called wax. We make wax in our ears, but it's for something different. For plants, this is to stop water from leaving the plant cells. Um, we also want to stop water from leaving our cells, but we don't actually use a lipid to do that. We use a special protein. It's in your skin. It's called keratin. Very waterproof, and it stops not only water from getting into our skin, which would be bad, but also water leaving our skin, which would also be bad. So we use a protein, plants use a lipid. We'll talk about proteins after lipids. So that's our fourth. Our fifth function of lipids are hormones. Now I mentioned these earlier. Probably the best known ones, those being your sex hormones, testosterone and estrogen. Um, but we have all kinds of hormones in our body. There's an entire system of the body called the endocrine system, which releases numerous hormones. Hormones control long-term and kind of permanent changes in the body. So they control when you grow, how you grow, different things that develop in your body, as well as activating certain biological processes. For instance, they control how much blood sugar is supposed to be running around in your bloodstream. They control whether or not your hair is growing, or various and sundry things like that. So these hormones, they do kind of long-term changes. This is different from the nervous system, which does quick changes, um, and quick responses to stimuli. Hormones are a much longer scale. We'll talk more about them in a bit. And then finally, we also see lipids throughout the entirety of your body. Every single one of your cells uses these things called phospholipids as part of the membrane. And so if you recall from biology, the cell membrane is made of something called the phospholipid bilayer. Two layers of lipids, and they're arranged kind of tail to tail. They're sided. They're polar. They have two different ends, and the ends line up against each other to make your cell membranes. So those are our six functions of lipids. Let's move on. One of the places where we see lipids all over the body is long-term energy storage. So this is that first function. And these are called triglycerides. And we can kind of work our way through why they're called what they're called. Well, tri is a prefix that we have seen before, and tri means three. So three glycerides, and that's kind of exactly what we have here. So this component that I've circled in red is a glycerol molecule, or part of a glycerol molecule. And then notice that we have one, two, three things coming off of that glycerol. These three things are called fatty acids, and we'll talk about them. We'll see those in a little bit. So what are triglycerides? Triglycerides are when you eat food and you don't use up all of the calories, your body stores the extra energy, which is in the sugar molecules or whatever. There's certain processes that it follows, where it makes fatty acids out of the excess of what you've consumed, because you're not using all the calories immediately, and it stores these excess calories, it turns them into fatty acids, stores them as triglycerides, and then these triglycerides are then stored in the fat cells of your body, so that we can use these later as an energy source. Your body then can send out a different type of lipid called a hormone, which I mentioned earlier, and those hormones instruct the body to release from the fat cells triglycerides, and then these triglycerides can be wrapped up again into little carbohydrates to then be used as energy later on. So we have our one glycerol molecule and our three fatty acids. Okay. So how do we make a triglyceride? Well, it's the same way as we've made all of our other biological macromolecules, and that is dehydration synthesis. So again, what are we doing here? We're dehydrating, removing water to synthesize, to make something. And we have a nice little picture of it right here. We have our glycerol on the left, and notice that that has an OH. You guys see this OH right here, and right here. Those OHs are called hydroxyl groups. And the fatty acids also have an OH. OH, OH, OH. So we have two O's and two H's. Well, what we can do is from those two O's and two H's, we can remove one of the O's and two of the H's, and then we have two H's and an O. Well, that's water. Look at that. So if we can remove those, we leave behind one of the oxygens, and that is our bond right there. That's dehydration synthesis. And so what we've done is we've taken all of these fatty acids and we've stuck them, clicked them onto the glycerol backbone. Here's a nice little animation that shows it. As we can see, we're going to remove water from the OHs, forming our triglyceride. Excellent. Now, what about the fatty acids? Fatty acids, there's different types of fatty acids. There's two really primary types of fatty acids, and I think Mr. Berryman has a little lab for us in a bit that's going to show a little bit more of what the differences between the fatty acids are. But you might have seen these before. A lot of times on a food label, you'll see something to do with the fat. It's either saturated or unsaturated fats. A saturated fat, if you look here, notice that it's a straight line, right? There's no double bonds in between the carbons, so it's just straight through. The other word that you'll see for this is not saturated, but hydrogenated. Hydrogenated. That means full of hydrogen. The reason it's called that is because when you have a double or triple bond in a fatty acid, the way that you form that is by removing hydrogen. So if it's hydrogenated, that means that there's hydrogen all the way through. That's a saturated fatty acid, and these are considered the bad fats. These are solids at room temperature, so most animal fats would be saturated fatty acids, and then there's a number of others. The reason that people call these bad fats is because they're flat. As you can see, they're straight, which means the body has a much easier time of stacking them, right? So they can all kind of be in a row very easily because they all shoot off straight from that glycerol when they form the triglyceride. An unsaturated fatty acid, which is this on the bottom, see how it's bent? When you make this double bond right here, that causes the shape of the fatty acid to change. Well, if we have things that are bent like this and we try to stack them next to that onto that glycerol, they have to be next to each other. And if they're bent like this, they can run into each other. So it's actually more difficult for your body to store this as a triglyceride, which means it doesn't get stored onto your body as fat. So we think of the unsaturated fatty acids as better, as good. Now, obviously, there's going to be exceptions on both sides, and that's a whole nutrition thing, which we may get into in a bit. Um, but these are usually liquids at room temperature. So like olive oil and things like that. And you might see sometimes on the back of a food label, it might say not an unsaturated, but a polyunsaturated fatty acid. What that means is that there's, instead of one double bond, there's multiple double bonds. And those are usually considered to be kind of the best of the fats to consume. All right, well, we will finish here for today. Thanks so much for tuning in, and hope that you all have a good one. Bye bye.